This is the Business of Apps podcast, bringing you actionable insights from the leaders of the global app industry and the world's fastest growing apps. You can find more app news, data, and analysis over at businessofapps.com.
Welcome to the Business of Apps podcast. On this show, we invite app industry professionals to cover various topics. We promise to do our best to keep it both insightful but brief. In this episode, we have Eran Friedman, co-founder and CTO at Singular. Eran, welcome to the Business of Apps podcast.
Yeah, excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Great, Eran. It's great to have you on the podcast. Okay. It was late March 2018, a pretty unassuming day. Except this is when Apple launched its SKAdNetwork. I bet back then many people weren't sure what letters in this acronym should or shouldn't be capitalized, let alone what impact this ad network API from Apple will have on the app industry. 5 years forward, it is one of the most discussed topics among mobile app marketers, app publishers, ad networks, and mobile measurement partners, or just MMPs. In this episode, Eran will tell us about what SKAdNetwork 4.0 has brought on the table, how big of a deal it is, and more. But first, Eran, let's kick off this conversation with talking about you first. Please tell us about your background in mobile tech.
First of all, my name is Eran Friedman. I'm the CTO and co-founder here at Singular. Probably like many of the listeners, I started with mobile apps. I was always in tech, but this is pretty ancient history by now. But I was one of the first employees in a mobile consumer app named Onavo. This was back in 2009. So really in the early days, I would say, of the kind of mobile industry. I had kind of like a VPN-based freemium business to help kind of users get more of their data plans. And it was eventually acquired by Facebook in 2013. I've experienced myself the journey, the challenges, the excitement of like growing a consumer-based business from kind of the early days. And after that acquisition, myself and two friends of mine, also from Onavo, we kind of connected together and said, wow, we're so excited about this industry and we see all the data challenges out there for marketers, which kind of led us to something of our own and got us to Singular.
Yeah, that's always great to hear people from people who were at the very beginning of the app industry, from the first steps. They have the best insight into what's going on right now because they saw the industry where it was its infancy. That's always helpful to hear from people who saw like the very beginning of mobile. Now, what is Singular today? How do you guys manage to stand out the rest and be leading mobile marketing analytics and attribution company?
We're definitely one of the leading MMPs. We're actually ranked number one in G2 for mobile attribution marketing analytics. And the interesting thing is that we actually didn't start from attribution in the beginning. We wanted to kind of create the best ultimate marketing analytics product. We wanted to provide like the best data feeds for marketers to really understand what's going on with their campaigns. Many in the industry kind of remember the first cross aggregation product that we kind of released into the market. This was like way before in like 2014, basically connecting with the ad network APIs, getting all the costs, the campaigns, the creative assets, the budgets, bids, everything that you're basically running in your operation and putting it in a single unified place for you to see the results. And then we kind of expanded from there towards attribution. We've actually got the MMP license with Facebook and with all the other ad networks, and basically connected all the measurement or the attribution results with the ad network APIs to I'm connecting with. So really, we're the first who kind of were focused on building this unified marketing attribution. So showing you all the video assets, for example, that you're running, but also connecting it to what are the best videos causing your performance, right? So kind of connecting all the dots from the upper funnel to the lower funnel. And I think that's a bit of what led us also towards like this new era, as sometimes we call it, kind of this next generation of attribution. Now we're talking about like SKAdNetwork that you've touched a bit, and Android Privacy Sandbox and media mix modeling. So there are new measurement frameworks going up there, and a lot of things coming in very, very fast. And we've kind of put it as our top focus to be like the leading provider in all these new technologies for measurement. And it really ties with kind of our strengths around like data aggregation, data analysis, and making the most out of these.
Forgive me my ignorance. You've just mentioned Facebook ads from Meta. Is TikTok ads under your umbrella? Do you track attribution for TikTok ads as well?
Yes, definitely. We support all the major channels out there. So Facebook, TikTok, Snapchat, Twitter, Google, of course. All the ad networks out there. We have 100% coverage of all the UA channels out there for attribution and also for analytics. So I can even show kind of the assets that you're running with TikTok and all your campaign details side by side with your attribution results.
The app industry is vast. To navigate this space, you need a directory to look up suppliers and partners, and you need to know who are the best. Visit our marketplace directory at businessofapps.com/marketplace/podcast. And now back to the show. Gotcha. That's crucial. That's important. Before covering the SKAdNetwork 4.0 specifics, what is SKAdNetwork in general?
That's yep. So that's an important question, and to answer that, we need to kind of go a bit back in time to like about 2 years ago with kind of the dramatic announcement that Apple had for iOS. I'm sure pretty much everyone probably among the listeners kind of familiar with ATT or IDFA and kind of the privacy changes that happened then. Basically, Apple, until again, I'm familiar with lots of the long history of like what happened in iOS until that point, but just to maybe keep it brief, the entire industry has been operating on using an ID called the IDFA, ID for advertising, for various advertising needs, for campaign optimization, for measurement, for attribution, for retargeting. And the idea was that every device had a single IDFA that every app can basically access unless the user opts out, and you can use it for very clear and device-level attribution. And 2 years ago, basically, Apple announced the ATT change, the app tracking transparency change, in which they decided IDFA would now be not accessible by default for any app. And to get access, they have to show this famous ATT pop-up asking for consent that are tracking across apps and users from different apps. Naturally, as you can imagine, most of the users don't click allow tracking when they see that pop-up. So that caused and pretty much expected, I think, by Apple, a low percentage of users in which you can actually access the IDFA. So that was expected to be pretty dramatic news and a huge impact on the industry.
Exactly.
With that, though, Apple proposed basically a new approach. They've introduced in iOS 14.0 and kind of progressed throughout the OS versions, a new framework called SKAdNetwork. iOS 14.0, it was SKAdNetwork version 2.0, basically. And the idea was it's a new API to provide attribution measurement in an anonymized way, a privacy-safe way, as how they've called it. The idea is it's aggregated, it's anonymized, but it shows you, it can basically enable you to see your performance, how many installs you got, how many purchases you got, how much revenue you got from your marketing campaigns, but without compromising on the user identity or the user privacy. So on the one hand, the advantage of using SKAdNetwork is that it covers all of your users. The users don't need to consent for tracking or anything. SKAdNetwork works across all of them, regardless of consent, because it's anonymized. The downside, though, is it's very, very different from what the industry has been used to. It works like anonymously aggregated. It's very different. It had many limitations out there that just made it difficult for the industry to work with, which kind of leads us to kind of the gradual improvements that Apple did throughout the years, basically, until we got to like Apple's SKAdNetwork version 4.0 that now we've got to and we're talking about.
Yeah, so essentially it was the Apple's answer on this reconciliation to be able to track performance of your advertising campaigns and keep users happy, respecting their privacy. So we're the iteration 4.0 of this Apple's attempt to make everybody happy. As far as I know, this latest 4.0 version brings 5 major updates for SKAdNetwork. So let's cover them briefly, starting with crowd anonymity and source identifier. What are these?
Let's go through these step by step. Crowd anonymity is a really interesting concept and a bit of a revamp that they did around what was previously named as privacy thresholds. So just to explain things a bit around the basics, SKAdNetwork has a kind of a design around volume of the campaigns. They basically say that if you're running very low volume campaigns, you're getting like 1 install per day or like 2 installs per day, then whatever results they would give you, you could potentially figure out who those users are, right, in very low volumes of matters. So they've introduced, this was already in SKAdNetwork 2.0, they've introduced a concept called privacy thresholds, in which by default, if you have very low volume, you would not get much information. You would just know that you got that number of installs, but without knowing what is the value of those users, what did these users actually do. And once you pass the privacy thresholds, then you start getting full information. Full information is maybe a bit too optimistic to say, but you get more information about these users. It's called the conversion value, exactly, across this campaign. So you can think about the privacy thresholds as like a binary decision. Either you pass them or not. If you didn't pass them, you're not getting anything. And you've passed them, you get a lot more information. The challenge, though, and that's what led us to crowd anonymity, is that it was a very simplified threshold. And many, like smaller studios, for example, smaller app marketers, just don't have the massive volumes of campaigns, right? So they're just getting no information at all. It was practically impossible for them to optimize the SKAdNetwork. So with crowd anonymity, Apple basically introduced multiple tiers, as they call it, for crowd anonymity. They're saying now it's not just a single threshold. There's a different tiers that you can be in. And the higher the tier that you are, the higher crowd that you are, then the more value you're going to get because the more anonymous they are. So in the very, very, very low tier, in which again, you're getting just barely 1 or 2 installs, you're still not getting anything. But just if you kind of increase the volume a bit further, you're already starting to get a bit more details. And if you continue scaling with the campaigns, which is mostly for the more large scale advertisers out there, you'll get more and more information out there. And that maybe leads me to the kind of second concept that you've mentioned, of course, the source identifier. And I think it really demonstrates how crowd anonymity is used. So by default, basically source identifier means where did this user come from? Where did the scan performance come from? Is it from a specific campaign, a specific creative, a specific geography? And naturally, the more granular it is, like users who came from a specific campaign, and usually there's like less users coming from them, and there's again concerns around privacy or whether you can figure out who these are. So Apple introduced in this new feature called Source Identifier the ability to tie it to crowd anonymity. They basically say that, again, when you just start the campaign, you don't have much volume, the source identifier is going to be limited to pretty high level granularity, basically only just at the campaign level, let's say. They've used kind of from a technical perspective, they're hiding this full source identifier is based on 4 digits. So you can think about it as like a number between 1 and 10,000. And in the beginning, in the lowest crowd anonymity, they only show 2 digits. And those 2 digits would usually be mapped to a specific campaign that you're running. But if you're scaling up and you're running more and more installs and getting more installs, they'll uncover more digits of those source identifiers. So now the 3rd digit can be, let's say, the country from which the user came from, or the 4th digit can be from which creative did the user come from. Each network can basically use that source identifier according to how they see fit. But the idea, again, is with higher volume, you get more information, more granularity about the user.
So from what you can see as of right now, this level of granularity introduced by Apple is enough. I mean, the concept was originated, beforehand, before practice. Now people have run a number of campaigns, like there was a real experience. Do you think there's room for improvement for this concept, or it's pretty good as of right now?
I would say, well, a few things. First of all, there's definitely always room for improvement. I mean, generally, SKAdNetwork is still extremely new for us, and it's very, very different from what everyone is used to. You used to know an exact IDFA and all the details where it came from, like which
Yeah.
campaign, which ad set, which creative, which year. You knew basically everything. And now you're kind of limited to those digits and how they're encoded and what's provided and those tiers. It's much more difficult to get around with. So I think the entire industry is still getting used even to the concept. SKAdNetwork 4 was just released in November. Most of the networks didn't even make the adjustments to kind of support it. So right now everyone is basically in like testing mode, seeing those first results, seeing the level of the granularity that they're seeing. And I think we'll probably need the industry would probably need a few months at least to kind of get the feeling of whether it's good enough to run campaigns at scale or whether they're looking for more improvements there.
So, generally speaking, no matter how much granular a crowd anonymity concept will be, it will be approximation still compared to the IDFA usage previously, but we need a few more months it remains to be seen, let's say in 6 months, what will be the kind of a general assessment of how good or bad crowd anonymity works in real life. Next up is multiple postbacks. What does this one bring for mobile app marketers, and why do we need more postbacks?
That's a great question. So, okay, so again, kind of returning to previous versions of SKAdNetwork. You know what? Maybe even going before to when you had IDFA. Postbacks are basically talking about the ability to send multiple signals to both the ad networks and seeing multiple events that the user did throughout their lifetime. So before you had an IDFA, you knew from the beginning where it belonged to, and you see all the events that IDFA did. They went through a registration, maybe if it's a gaming app, then they went through kind of the levels of the app, maybe they entered the store, maybe they made a purchase, and so forth. You see basically the entire lifetime of the user. And the networks also receive the data. You could send postbacks across all of the events. So, each network would basically see essentially everything. With SKAdNetwork 2.0, kind of the initial release there, they essentially supported only a single postback to be sent. And it was only after a pretty, I would say, complicated timer mechanism that can be controlled. But the bottom line is that the most simplest way to use it was after 24 hours, meaning that from the first time that the user opens the app, you had only 24 hours to essentially decide what's the value of the user, what type of events kind of that user is making. Then after 24 hours, send a single postback with the value of the user. So it's only a single time in which you're getting a signal. And there's a lot of sophistication that's being done by MMPs like ours and trying to capture as much signal in it. For example, if we know that the user passed like 10 levels and made a purchase, so they had like a revenue range of that purchase, and trying to combine all that information in a number that's being included in this single postback after 24 hours. Now, you can already imagine the possible limitations from these because many gaming companies, for example, only have in-app purchases long after 24 hours. Like most users only start playing the game and they might make a purchase after 7 days or 30 days or even longer than that. So a single postback after 24 hours really didn't include enough meaningful information to understand whether your campaign is performing. So this is probably one of the most, I would say, exciting features in SKAdNetwork 4.0, because it seems that Apple recognized that limitation and they opened up this postback mechanism up to, instead of one postback, up to 3 different postbacks in specific time windows and longer time windows than we had before. So now you'll have the first postback after 2 days, the second postback after 7 days, and then the third postback after 35 days. So it basically gives you 3 different opportunities from when the user opened the app after 2, 7, and 35 days to collect some signal and send it back to the network and for yourself for measurement. And now when you have at least 35 days of activity of the user, it becomes, much possibly easier to understand whether they made a purchase, whether they succeeded in their trial of the subscription, whether they went through kind of a purchase order. So there's an opportunity to make many more events that can provide you signal on your campaign. I think it's one of the most exciting features of SKAdNetwork 4.
Right. So totally makes sense. We all live very unpredictable, complicated lives. There's no way you can guarantee that the bulk of your users will be taking specific action within the first day. It always varies. The same people downloading the apps from you in different situations, different time of the year, will be behaving differently. Like time constraints will always be varied. So yeah, these postbacks do make sense. These time frames absolutely will allow you to be more efficient with your tracking of your ad campaigns. Now, next up, postback delays and locking conversion values. What is this one is about?
Right. So, maybe a bit of like the bad news or like the hidden small letters around this new feature of multiple postbacks is, again, Apple has like all these trade-offs between giving you more information, but also protecting the user privacy. And they've also introduced it in this specific feature. And basically they've said, okay, so you're gonna have those second and third postback, but we're going to introduce more randomness in these postbacks. So those postbacks won't be sent exactly after 7 days, but they would actually wait on the device for a random time between 1 and 6 days after the window has been finished, and then it would be sent in a random time to the network. So basically it means, if we take an example, that, okay, the user made the significant, like say they made a purchase on the 35th day, right? Just at the end of that time window, and you were able to capture it and encode it, then the postback would kind of lock the value there after 35 days by default, wait a random period of time, let's say up to 6 more days, so a total of 41 days, if you can count 35 plus 6, and then send it to the network. And the idea is that you wouldn't know at which day actually it happened. Just it happened in the range of, around 6 days, essentially. Makes it more difficult to identify specific users, still providing aggregated information, but naturally making it much more complicated to figure out, okay, I've made a change in Monday, once I start seeing kind of postbacks after a month, basically, which is it before my change or after my change? I suddenly need to wait to see to really be sure. So it adds more complexity there. So that's the concept of postbacks delays and the random that they've introduced. Now, another concept that Apple kind of tried to build in the feature is they recognize that maybe for some marketers, 35 days can be sometimes too long to wait for postback. Let's say you have a subscription trial that ends after 10 days, for example, and you don't want to wait for 35 days until you get that postback. So they added a feature called the locking mechanism, in which the developer can choose to lock the value after just 10 days, for example. Say, okay, I want to encode the events that happen after 10 days. Let's say I've passed the subscription or not, and then lock it. And from there, the delay mechanism would start. There would still be a random timer, and the network would get the postback. So the idea is that you have the option to shorten those strict time windows that we talked about, 2 days, 7 days, and 35 days. You can shorten them to whatever you feel is suitable for your need and use case, basically. On the one hand, that's definitely great news. It provides more flexibility, but it also adds some complicated matters. What happened if the user actually opened the app after 14 days and not 10 days? Do you lock it or not? If you lock it, then it kind of depends on when the user actually opened the app. And then you basically would have no idea from which time that user happened, because all the random and the locking just cause all the postback to be sent in very random days. So you would basically be able to look at maybe a monthly granularity of your campaigns and not really a daily granularity. So you can see that using these lockings and with the additional randomness, it has advantages for getting more real-time feedback, but it introduces more random to the behavior and makes it more complicated to analyze the results.
Yeah, I see. Unavoidable consequence you have to deal with.
Yep.
Next up is web to app support. This number in my head from reading recent news that like 84% e-commerce is taking place in mobile apps, but still it's not 100. So what's happening in the mobile browser still matters. And Apple is closing this gap. So they're providing web to app support. What do app marketers need to know about this one?
Yeah. So there's, like you said, definitely there's a large portion of users who come from kind of web, but it really depends on the use case and the app that you have. There are many companies who have like apps in which like the standard kind of user flow for them is from app to app, basically native kind of classic app. But there are also many use cases in which, let's say if you have an app, but you also have a website, for example, and it's pretty significant, right? You're running maybe web campaigns, for example, where you're getting just like traffic from Google search, for example, right? Or from other website sources. Think about like Reddit, for example, reddit.com, or any other kind of publishers who have heavy web traffic. If you are using any of those sources, or if you feel that they match your use case, you think that it would be valuable for those users to come from, then definitely it's good news for you, right? Because now as a marketer, for then SKAdNetwork just didn't support them at all. You couldn't track users were coming from websites, and now it's possible. So my recommendation would be to think about the use cases of your users, where it would make sense for them to see the ad for your app. And if it's coming from websites, definitely reach out to these networks, channels, publishers, and ask if they have plans to now integrate with SKAdNetwork and allow running those campaigns.
Gotcha. All right. Finally, conversion value decrease. Why this one is important?
Yeah, so previously in SKAdNetwork, conversion values, basically those events that you're collecting about the user, could only increase up. So, again, if they've passed through levels of the game or made an in-app purchase and so forth, those values could only go up, and that was kind of the classic use case. However, there are many cases in which, especially if you think about multiple postbacks in a longer time period of the user, in which you might realize that the value of the user actually goes down with time. Maybe, for example, if it's a subscription app and they started a trial, you can say that, okay, it's kind of a high value user or medium level user. But if at some point they've canceled the trial or decide they're not opting in, then maybe you want to decrease the value of the user because the trial wasn't successful. So it made sense once they've introduced the increased timeline that they want to provide the option for developers to decide if the value of the user actually now can decrease and not just keep increasing with time. Because there are actions that they can do that signifies that it might not be the best match user for them as well.
Now, Eran, in your estimate, you touched on this briefly previously a bit, but just in general terms, these updates for SKAdNetwork, is there room for improvement? Like how they meet the hopes and dreams of mobile marketers as of today?
Yeah, I think the hopes and dreams of marketers is to go 2 years back in time, and kind of get back to the idea phase. Maybe that's kind of the dreams, but it's probably just dreams by this point. So it's hard to imagine SKAdNetwork getting to that kind of dreamy level that we had before. But I think there's definitely a lot of creative ways and kind of features that could be added and improved to at least get us closer and closer to like making sure that we have a clear and accurate kind of performance marketing at scale. Yes, there are still gaps in SKAdNetwork that would be interesting for Apple to handle. For example, SKAdNetwork only handles basically new user or basically app download measurements. So only if you don't have the app yet in your device, then SKAdNetwork would work and send the post back. But there are many cases, especially now that we don't have IDFA, that ads are shown to users who actually already have the app, and you might not even be aware. If the user would actually click the ad, might be for legitimate reasons, but they already have the app installed, then SKAdNetwork would just not function. You won't see anything. You wouldn't even know that it happened. So everything around like re-engaging users and like thinking about like basically thinking about the frequency of the ads for existing users could definitely benefit from more signals about SKAdNetwork showing for existing users as well. So some of the things that I think can be interesting for them. And definitely with all these like new features of granularity and kind of longer course, I think we're just in the early stage and the industry is kind of testing things. And I'm sure that we'll see challenges and issues and we kind of share feedback with Apple. And my guess is definitely there would be continued new versions of SKAdNetwork to support additional use cases.
I hear you. Go back in time, but unfortunately, we can only travel forward in time, 1 second at a time.
Yep.
All
For
right.
sure.
My final question for the first part of the show is this. I tend to ask this question a lot lately to people who are in mobile advertising and app industry for a number of years, which is the case for you for sure. What would you like to change about mobile app industry the most?
Yeah, it's a great question. On top of my mind, I just think I just love this industry. It's really the best industry. It's like people are super smart, they're kind, they're innovative. It's a very dynamic industry. So there's no like a thing that I would say like I would want to change like for the better because it's like bad or anything like that. So I wouldn't change anything from that regard. But I think there are things that I'm excited about, like changes in the industry that I think are really kind of encourage like even more innovation and kind of interesting opportunities for exploration. Like, for example, now the discussions and the rumors on like potential new app store ecosystems that might be opened up both on iOS and Android, with kind of the notion that maybe you would have more than just a single app store, but multiple ways or multiple places in which you can actually distribute your apps. I think it's really interesting to kind of think about and like the possible explorations and ways to kind of discover apps. I think that's it's been kind of an interesting limitation in a way, or like characteristic of this ecosystem until now, that everything was very consolidated in like single app stores, and it will be interesting to see how it opens up now. But yeah, that's the only thing on top of mind.
Gotcha. It's very interesting to see what Microsoft is doing right now, especially their huge leg up with ChatGPT, which kind of caught up many people off guard, including Google, for a certain degree. So yeah, it remains to be seen how Microsoft will be able to change this so familiar, so well established the duopoly of iOS and Android. All right. We're switching to the second part of the show, which is a quick one. I just want to give a chance to my audience know the people who are coming on the show a little bit better. So hence, these are quick questions. All right. What smartphone do you have now? Are you been switching between both sides, iOS and Android, or staying kind of on one side all the time?
Yeah, so right now I have an iPhone 13, and I also have a Pixel 5. So my main device is iPhone. I've been an iPhone user since the early start, since 2009 with my iPhone 3G. But I always have kind of in my pocket another Pixel, and I've been kind of playing around with the Android devices as well, just to make sure that I keep in touch with the Android ecosystem too.
Right, you have to. That's your job. What was your first
Exactly.
mobile phone? Before
Right. So yeah,
iPhone,
just
those first phones you can put in your pocket, that era.
oh wow, yeah. So it was a Nokia. Wow, I forgot the model, but it was kind of the classic Nokia model that like was everywhere basically. Like it was a very kind of classic, small, very convenient kind of Nokia models phone, and yeah, I loved it for sure.
Right. And as we're moving in time, there would be interesting period that some folks will be a generation that do not remember those times. And what was Nokia 3310 or something will not ring a bell for these people because they just completely passed that period because they were born later. And only we will be remembering those times.
Yeah, just means that we're old, that's all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Imagine you've left your smartphone at home for whatever reason, you're out. What is the most missing feature for you?
So if I'm without a phone, at least I have my Apple Watch with me, so I feel more comfortable. But no,
Yeah.
in terms of like features on my phone, I'm like constantly emailing and texting and like checking things. So I think that's kind of the first thing in mind. More of like the basics. I was less like I don't know, like I'm not as attached to like my social feeds or anything like that, but more kind of communication
Which is
with the
good.
team and such. hmm
All right. What new technologies for mobile are you most excited about or waiting to surface? Hardware, software, not necessarily something that we're all reading here about in the news, but for you specifically, what would you like your phone to be able to do, which is not capable of doing right now?
Um, well, I think there's obviously a lot of interesting developments around generative AI and ChatGPT and kind of LLM models and all that. I think it's opens up tons of opportunities and interesting ways to think about like app technology and like new ways that the app and that phone can help me. We just have like this customer that have been using their app recently called the Word Tune. It's by a company named AI21, and it's a fantastic app using generative AI. And it's a keyboard that you install in your phone, and it helps you phrase your thoughts while you're kind of writing. So I'm using like notes a lot, using email a lot, and basically based on kind of the concepts that he has, it proposes like different phrases or ways that I can kind of think about how to write and helps me like unlock in a way like my creative writing in a sense. So I think it's just like an example of where like you can think about how are these apps can help you like unlock creativity and think about different ways and things. And I think it's exciting.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting, and I'm dying to know what Apple will be telling from the WWDC stage this summer about AI, if anything. This is a really interesting
Mhm.
area for Apple. Something is going on behind the scenes for sure. Um, all right, very, very final question before I let you go. How can people get in touch with you and get more information about what you do?
Right. So, other standard ways, of course, you can check our website at singular.net. You can write me an email, Eran@singular.net, or you can hit me on LinkedIn, Twitter. I'm everywhere. Just look for Eran Friedman. It's Singular, and feel free to send me a message, connect, and always happy to chat with the industry.
Great. Eran, thank you so much for coming on the show and spending time with us. Thank you.
Of course.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for having me.
And that was Eran Friedman, co-founder and CTO at Singular. To listen to more episodes, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts. Just search for Business of Apps and you will find us easily. Remember, we release episodes on Mondays, so subscribe and you will be able to get new episodes on your smartphone, tablet, or computer as soon as we release them. And please don't forget to leave us a review or comment on iTunes. It is highly appreciated. And all episodes will also be available on businessofapps.com. Thank you for listening. See you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Business of Apps podcast. For more, head on over to businessofapps.com.